Problem of Carrie. Get it? Like the problem of Susan from Narnia? It's a literary reference. Did you get it? In case you aren't aware, The Problem of Susan is a short story by unproblematic and uncancelled beloved author Neil Gaiman. Just kidding, fuck that guy. And tackles widespread discontent about the treatment of Susan Pevensey in the final Narnia novel, The Last Battle. Not that Gaiman is the only person to write about this, of course. Many have, including Ursula Vernon, but I'm already getting lost in the weeds here. In The Last Battle, every character from Narnia ever gets to be reunited and live forever in Aslan's country after dying strange and horrible deaths. Every character, that is, except for Susan Pevensey. Susan is left behind on Earth and doesn't get to go to heaven because she is no longer a friend of Narnia. The other characters explain how she has become preoccupied with unimportant things like clothes and makeup and parties. She no longer believes in Narnia, and therefore is punished. But I bring the problem of Susan up in the context of Stephen King's novel Carrie, though, because I think Carrie as a text poses some interesting problems for 2025, just as Susan the character poses some interesting questions and problems for 2025. Specifically, though, the problem of each character, both Susan and Carrie, arises based both on how they are treated as a character within their texts, and how they are treated in the meta-narrative of their own text's existence. Susan is a problem to her fictional world because of her femininity and lack of belief in something the other characters hold dear, and the same is true for Carrie White. Susan is a problem outside of her own text for fans' feelings about her treatment at the hands of the text, but the same is not necessarily true for Carrie White. Instead, to me, the problem of Carrie is that for as timeless and tragic as she is, I don't know how much more she has to say for us in 2025. And I don't mean to say that Carrie the novel or Carrie the girl are somehow irrelevant or outdated. No. I think both say interesting things about suburban rot, femininity, bullying, coming of age, not trusting the government, etc. But I don't know if there's anything new to say about those things from this text. But why bring it up then? Well, because Mike Flanagan is currently developing an 8-episode miniseries for Amazon based on Stephen King's novel Carrie. Now, look, I love Flanagan. He's proven himself as an expert in the horror genre and also in the business of adaptations. He's able to really expand and build on older works that may seem tired and still add something new and fascinating to them, while also preserving the original soul. He only has one miss for me, and that's the midnight, stupid, super boring Lamer Club show. So if I had to pick someone who could potentially pull off a new Carrie as a TV show, it would be Mike. His comments on the project are almost promising and reassuring too, as he recently said, "I can't spoil the changes that we made in order to kind of find a story that felt like it needed to be told, but we made some pretty substantial changes. When I brought it to Stephen King, he said, well, why? Leave her alone. She's good. She's done. I'd rather we focus on other things." But when I sent him kind of the layout of how I saw it could work, he really liked it. And he came back and he said, actually, yeah, I think this is interesting. I can't talk more about it other than we're in the writer's room. We're having a great time, and I think we're going to tell a story that will be surprising and impactful, very relevant to our modern society and to issues in our country. My oldest son is 14 years old, and I look at him as I'm working on the story and think it's important for his generation. I think there'll be something in there that I hope will be useful to them in this world. Sure, that sounds great. The world kids inhabit in 2025 is not exactly the same as the world they inhabited in 1976 when the Brian DePalma film was made. The issue, though, is that I don't really think that matters. In case you weren't aware, here's a little bit of background on Carrie as a franchise. Carrie the novel was published in 1974. It's set in 1979. The Brian DePalma film was released in 1976, and I think it's supposed to be set the same year, but that doesn't really matter. In 1999, the same year I was born, a sequel was released, though I haven't seen this, and nobody else has either, so sorry, who cares. 3 years after that, though, in 2002, there was a TV remake/new adaptation of the novel, and in 2013, there was another adaptation starring Chloe Grace Moretz. So this book has been kicked around a lot, and each adaptation has sort of tried to update it for its own time. In particular, the 2013 adaptation, directed by Kimberly Pierce, who seems like a nice lady but did a bad job with this movie, has one update I really like, and that is, well, it's the cell phones. So, sorry Mike, but it's already been done. Albeit, it was done in 2013, so it's still a little bit dated, but when the shower scene happens, one of the bullies, Chris, records the whole event, posts it, and then plays the video at prom. I think this is a good update, and I don't really know what else there is to do with this, but hey, I'm not Mike Flanagan. The biggest thing I see missing from all these adaptations, though, is the epistolary element of the novel. And if you haven't read the book, a big part of it consists of letters and excerpts from in-universe characters and testimonies about the prom that Carrie destroys after it's happened. The largest of these excerpts are from a fictional government commission called the White Commission, a government investigation done into Carrie White and her powers. The conclusion of the Commission's report is that Carrie's powers were an aberration, and that there's no further risk to the public from other telekinetic individuals, something the reader knows is not true due to other scientific papers in the novel, and also a letter at the end of the novel from a woman who describes her own daughter's ability to move things with her mind. Now, to be totally honest here, these are not my favorite parts of Carrie. I think some of them are a little too long, they throw off the pacing, and they take away time from the rest of the characters who I find more interesting. However, I do think they're important and add several unique elements to the book. Not only do they spice up the narrative from a structural and stylistic perspective, but the White Commission in particular allows King to take his themes beyond just a girl or a school or a town and apply them to a much wider societal ill. Carrie has superpowers, yes, but those aren't her real problems, and those aren't the real horrifying parts of the novel. The real problem of Carrie is that she doesn't fit in due to her abusive mother, and the other kids at school, and the town itself, do nothing to help Carrie. Carrie is emotionally and physically abused. She's locked in a closet, her mother hits her, she's denied food, and her mother fails to tell her key things about her body and sexuality. Carrie is denied every opportunity to be her own person, in every sense, from her femininity to her interests to her powers. But these powers are not the element of the novel which is the most horrifying. What's the most horrifying is how the entire school and town knows what is happening to Carrie, but just chooses to do nothing about it. Even the closest thing she has to a cheerleader at school, the gym teacher, Miss Desjardins, smacks Carrie and finds herself being repulsed by Carrie before she grows as a character and chooses to help Carrie. Carrie's foil in the novel is Sue Snell, a pretty and popular girl with supportive parents and a loving boyfriend. You could also maybe make the case that the bully, Chris Hargensen, is a foil for Carrie, but I think Sue works better because both Sue and Carrie are characterized by a great deal of self-loathing, both have their lives ruined by Chris, and both have important relationships with Tommy Ross, Sue's boyfriend. Additionally, these characters are also very linked by blood. They begin and end the novel with each other. Sue is even there when Carrie dies, and Sue is the only one who ever even tries to see things from Carrie's perspective. Both characters are also linked by menstruation, as the novel opens with Sue bullying Carrie about Carrie's period, and there's a scene later in the novel when Sue finds out that her own period is late, and that she is pregnant. Finally, at the end of the novel, Sue gets her own period just as Carrie dies, though I'm kind of stupid and I'm not totally sure if this is supposed to suggest that Sue was never actually pregnant, or that Carrie terminated Sue's pregnancy when she was exploring Sue's mind with her telekinetic abilities. But maybe it can be read either way. Anyway, I bring up Sue because she's my favorite character in the novel, and I find her the most interesting. Sue is also the great example of how King tries to explore suburban rot. She has everything, yes, and yet she still feels shitty all the time, has intimacy issues with her boyfriend, and takes out her frustration on a helpless girl. Sue is indicative of the entire town, though the real bully, Chris Hargensen, and her abusive relationship with the bully Billy Nolan represent the town's more extreme tendencies. King describes the novel's setting, Chamberlain, as bucolic and peaceful, a place anyone would want to grow up. And that's, of course, your Carrie White. And yet, in classic King and 70s horror fashion, a rot lies beneath the town, spreading and infecting everything. The scene when Chris and Billy sneak out to the farm and kill some pigs for their blood is a great example of this, as are the descriptions of Billy Nolan himself driving his beater car around at night and running over stray dogs in order to escape his mother and her abusive boyfriend fighting all the time. The town's rot and decay is also literally represented at the end of the book when it gets destroyed by one of its own, Carrie. The biggest symbol of the town's duality, however, is of course the prom itself. Senior proms are an iconic image of the American high school experience. They're full of glitz, glamour, school spirit, and smiles. However, as we all probably know, there is a tremendous amount of stress, heartbreak, and just stupid drama at the core of every prom. Not everyone is always happy. The makeup and dresses cover scars and poverty and insecurities. The hours of decorating end up in landfills. It's fleeting and it does not last forever. And in Carrie unmasks all of this gloss, for the farce it is, by burying it in blood and flame. But what does all this have to do with the White Commission itself and the epistolary elements of the novel? I was hoping you'd finally ask that, so I'm glad you did. Thanks for asking. Remember that King himself, when he wrote this book, was a poor, lowly English teacher when he wrote it in the 70s. He was like 26 years old. Trust in the government was pretty low. The Great Society wasn't doing so great. Poverty, especially in rural areas, was and continues to be a huge problem. The point of Carrie and the White Commission thematically, then, is not that we should be afraid of superpowers. We should not be afraid of supervillains. We should be afraid of the circumstances that create the hurt and the evil behind supervillains and people with the capacity for destruction. For King, and therefore Carrie, this is pretty much just poverty. I mean, Margaret White, Carrie's mother, isn't like out begging for money, but she's a single, abusive parent with no kind of support, either familial or financial or social, and while this is largely her fault because she's ostracized everyone around her, it's not Carrie's fault. At all levels, government and society fail this girl. The White Commission and society in general shun the idea of Carrie as an aberration. Her powers were a once-in-a-lifetime thing, never to be seen again. But the truth is that there are hundreds of Carries in every town, kids who are ignored, neglected, hurt, abused, shunned, forgotten, and abandoned by their towns, by their families, by their country. So how do we prevent the next Carrie? It's not by studying and isolating TK genes, it's by being kind and reaching out. It's by instituting strong social programs and systems. And while this all does come through just fine at the basic high school bullying is bad element of the text, I think each adaptation has lost a little bit of King's wider theme by abandoning these epistolary sections. And to be fair, the 2002 version kind of tries to match this structurally with all the detective and interrogation scenes, but it's just not really the same. Could Flanagan pull this off convincingly? I mean, probably, and I'd be shocked if he didn't at least try, since he's seemingly going to have like 8 hours of TV to adapt a 200-page story. And I wouldn't be shocked to see him use a structure similar to season 1 of True Detective, what with the interviews as a framing device for the mystery. And I think that there is a real opportunity to do something different from the prior adaptations here, especially concerning those epistolary sections. But the question still remains as to whether or not we need do something different. I would say that for as good as the DePalma film is, it still has some issues both as a film and as an adaptation. I haven't seen the 2002 TV film all the way through, but what I have seen is just, like, comically terrible. Sorry. The 2013 film is really just like a smelly, wet bag of absolutely nothing. So, yeah, sure, Carrie fans haven't exactly gotten their Black Panther yet, I guess, but also they have, because there's the book, and, like, you can read it. And the original film gets everything important in the book that would work well on film, because, again, for as interesting as they are, those epistolary sections in the novel do throw off the pacing and would probably only be worse on screen. So, yeah. The problem of Carrie, then, is not Carrie herself, but how best to treat her in modern times. There is, though, one other problem with Carrie, the text, that I'd like to address that I haven't really seen addressed anywhere else. Probably because it doesn't actually matter that much, but since we're here, let's talk about it. So remember all that yapping that I did earlier about Sue Snell and suburban decay and suburban rot as a preamble to the government doesn't do enough to help poor people segment? Well, there's a little bit more to that. If you don't know this already, I am a high school English teacher, and I feel like I say that as often as that weird guy, Ben Shapiro, says that his wife is a doctor, but whatever, you need to know it for this next part to make sense. So anyway, earlier this year, I was trying to find a good book for my elective high school sci-fi fantasy horror class to read in their horror unit. So I was like, why not check out Carrie, right? It's short, it's about teenagers, it's easy to understand. Let's see what's going on. So I reread it. It was a little spicy, but I figured I could make it work for an elective with like 12 kids in it and hopefully not get myself canceled. It had been over a decade since I'd last read it though, so again, I had to go back through it and see what was going on. And there's a scene early on when Sue Snell and Tommy Ross are trying to do some sex time, but it keeps getting thrown off by Sue Snell's self-loathing and existential guilt over throwing tampons at Carrie. I hate when that happens. Anyways, this leads her and Tommy to discussing their futures and how afraid Sue is of becoming unimportant and boring, just like her parents and everyone else in their perfect little town of Chamberlain, Maine. And at one point in this conversation, Sue makes reference to a place in town called Clean Corners and worries that once she's an adult, she'll join everyone else in just keeping the N-words out of Clean Corners. I remember this specifically because I made a note of that specific language being like inappropriate and needing to be discussed or at least, not read out loud with the high schoolers. And to be clear, in this scene, Sue is not trying to be overtly racist. She's criticizing her town for being racist and expressing her fear over taking part in their racism someday. And so she kind of drops just the tactical N-word here. But it's another aspect of that suburban and small town rot and decay that I discussed earlier. And Sue is trying to push back against it as she does the whole book. So anyways, a few weeks later, I ordered some paperback copies for my kids to, read while we're reading the book. These copies were the 50th anniversary version of the text, which is an important detail to keep in mind for later. So anyways, I get the books, we pass them out, and I'm reading the book out loud to my kids, and we get to that scene between Tommy and Sue, but no N-word. And so I think to myself, where's the racism? I keep reading and eventually decide I must have just been misremembering or getting my scenes mixed up, and that maybe it shows up later in the book. But a few days later, I was reading through an essay that I found online called Stephen King's American Vision from Childhood to Adulthood, Carrie the Long Walk, and Its Children Die for Their Future, which is quite the title, by a man named Nathaniel Gage Pennington, which I highly recommend if you have the time. So anyways, I get to the section where Pennington is discussing Carrie, and he excerpts this specific scene between Sue and Tommy, where, sure enough, Sue drops the hard R. And at this point, I really start scratching my head and, knocking on it a little bit and feeling like I'm going insane. So then I went and grabbed my paperback 50th anniversary version of the text, and I flip around until I find that scene again compared to Pennington's excerpt, and sure enough, the 50th anniversary says, keep the clean corners white. So that night when I got home, I went back to my hardcover edition, found the scene, and yeah, just as I remember, and just as in Pennington's excerpt, there's the slur. I compared this to another copy of the book, this one, the hardcover Hodder and Stahn 50th anniversary edition, which I have. Thank you, my girlfriend Abby, for buying that for me. This has the same text and features as the paperback, but it's just fancier. And by the same text, I mean the same text. Keep clean corners white, not keep the redacted out of clean corners. So at this point, I decided to do some searching online and found pretty much nothing about this. I thought that because Stephen King is a pretty liberal guy and also chronically online, he might have made the change himself and talked about it somewhere, especially since he intentionally removed rage from shelves after Columbine, but nothing. So I looked in the books themselves to see if there was a note about a corrected or updated text, and nothing. So finally, I was able to locate a post in r/Stephen King where someone noticed the same thing in the Kindle version of their text. The post was about a year old, and so I'm guessing that this was around the time of the 50th anniversary re-release. I haven't hunted down a paperback from before the 50th anniversary, but if I had to guess, I would say that it probably has the slur in it. So if you happen to have a copy from 5 or 10 or more years ago, take a look at it and let me know in the comments what it has on that scene. I would give you the page number, but they're all different in every copy, so. But by now you're probably wondering, so what? What's your point? Is this the day the book and movie guy comes out as pro N-word? Well, no. I want to be upfront by saying that I don't have a problem with updating text or removing racist elements necessarily on principle, providing on how it's done. I get that some things don't age well or that times and connotations change. But I don't really see a practical value in these redactions, though, outside of just opening up a conversation about these things, and especially in places like, say, a high school English classroom, where those conversations are meant to be had. Or in the case of something like Gone with the Wind, I think the little disclaimer ahead of it on HBO Max is great, even though it's poorly filmed and produced. I much prefer that approach to editing a text. However, if a text is edited, I think it's essential that it's pointed out somewhere, and in the case of Carrie, it's not. You would not know the text was changed unless you had a really weird and specific experience like mine, or just knew the book really well. And this makes me think and wonder, what else has been changed? I also have a lot less sympathy for this type of change or redaction in a 50-year-old horror novel written for adults than I would in a textbook for children or something that's frequently taught. In the case of Carrie, it's doubly confusing because this happens in a scene when a character is criticizing racism, albeit while being kind of casually racist herself. But there are scenes later in the book where a character is described by the narrators having large rolling eyes and dancing like someone in a minstrel show, and another character whose lips get bruised by her boyfriend after she's beaten up. Just kind of weird descriptions from the narrator, Stephen King, which don't add anything of value or commentary to the text. At least I don't really feel that they do, outside of just being kind of dated racist language. And yet, those descriptions are all left perfectly intact by this version of the text. Not to mention, the novel ends with dozens of teenagers dying horrible, violent deaths at the hands of a telepathic girl, but that's all okay, I guess. And so, what we have then is an unstable text. Granted, it's only one change that I'm aware of anyway, and this isn't the only unstable text out there, or even the most unstable text by a million miles, but it does present a potential problem. I don't see any director going out of their way to make Sue Snell's future actress ever say the word as the character does in the book, because it's not really that important. But to me, the use of the word and Sue's description of the situation in which it arises touches on the real horror of Carrie and the real horror in most of King's books, which are the social ones. It especially features several notable hate crimes, from how Henry Bowers treats Mike Hanlon, to the novel's opening murder of a gay man, and to the regular anti-Semitic attacks on Stanley Uris. Like, that's the whole point. The monster is a metaphor for social ills such as racism, just as in Carrie. And just like adaptations have removed the wider context provided on this topic by the White Commission, so too has the 50th anniversary removed this casual example of Sue and the town's hypocrisy, which will lead to more Carries. So, returning to the real problem of Carrie, it's this. The book doesn't need to be changed or readapted. Though it may be somewhat problematic and King spends way too much time describing naked teenage girls, I think this layered and raw text is what makes King's early writing so interesting and Carrie such a good, simple story. Sure, the methods and syntax may have technically changed, but the underlying issue at the heart of Carrie have not. Expectations for women, lack of opportunity and support for people in small towns, cruel social norms and standards which result in ostracization for anyone different, and just basic mean, closed-mindedness. Most of this comes through the story itself, but a lot of it is provided by the novel's epistolary framing device, a framing device which, unsurprisingly, has largely been neglected by each adaptation because it just doesn't work structurally as well on film as it does on the page. And yet, ironically, if someone were to say something new about this text or approach it in a new way, these would be the elements to include. Maybe then this actually gives credence to the episodic TV approach rather than a film. I don't know, I guess we'll see. But I will say that one of the things I would most like to see from a new adaptation actually is a woman, or, multiple women at the helm, writing and directing. The 1976 film was written and directed by two men. The same goes for the 2002 film. The 2013 film was directed by a woman, but written by two men, and one of these men was Lawrence Cohen, who also wrote the screenplay for the 76 film, and, just why? What is the point of remaking something if the same people involved in the original are doing the same thing again, but just doing it worse? Granted, yeah, the novel is written by a man, King himself, and that's cool. No hate, hey, obviously. No hate to Flanagan, but I think an all-woman approach would be a kind of a possible way of switching things up a little bit. And though, yes, we have Kimberly Pierce in the 2013 version, I hate to say it, but her film is severely lacking anything close to style, interest, or anything new at all. Giving Carrie to somebody just kind of off the wall like Chloe Zhao or like a Catherine Bigelow would be awesome, even though it's not their normal genre. Actually, it would be awesome because it's not their normal genre. Mary Herron would also do like a fucking crazy adaptation of this, though I don't really know what she's up to these days. And I'd also add that the 2019 movie Saint Maud is sort of what I imagine like a Margaret White prequel to be like, but also I bring it up because the director of that film, Rose Glass, would be another great choice for Carrie. Again, no hate to Mike. He's my boy, and he can do no wrong, but I'm just saying that if we have to do this again, let's just really swing for the fences. Okay? Finally, I want to end by clarifying that I don't think horror as a genre just means you get to do whatever you want or be as racist and sexist as you want. There's a way to be tastefully horrific, and sometimes King is just crass. I don't really think there's like a grand conspiracy to expurgate and ruin all horror books or to like remove racist language or anything. I just think that this one example of editing I stumbled across is somewhat emblematic of the conversations we can and should have with some of our most beloved books, especially genre fiction, from Narnia to Carrie. The problem of both these texts is not really just that we've changed as a society, but more so that we haven't changed as a society. A lot of these same problems depicted in these books are still around, and that having the same conversation over and over and over again about them without actually applying action to them doesn't solve any problems. However, having new conversations about them might. And so, I guess in that sense, maybe it means there isn't a problem after all, and that the new adaptation of Carrie and Greta Gerwig's adaptation of Narnia might both be good things. But who am I to say? We haven't seen either adaptation yet. Maybe they'll be good, maybe they'll be bad. Most likely, though, they'll probably be a mix of both, because that's most things, isn't it? At least I think so. But what do I know? I'm not rich, or smart, or successful. I just get bullied by teenagers at my job and by commenters on YouTube. So, okay. Bye.